The Rules Committee will come to order. We now have a quorum, I'm happy to see. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Hastings. I hope everyone had a wonderful Independence Day, and welcome back. We are in for an action-packed week, and we're here for consideration of H.R. 6079. The Repeal Obamacare Act is what it's entitled, and we are happy to welcome representatives of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, and the Education and the Workforce Committee. Why don't we begin in that order? Mr. Pitts is here in behalf of the chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and chairs the subcommittee on health, and we're awaiting Mr. Pallone, I see, who is the ranking member of the subcommittee. And we have Messrs. Price and Levin and Messrs. Rowe and Andrews. So let's, and here's Mr. Pallone. Mr. Pallone, please join your colleagues at the table here. And gentlemen, let me say that without objection, any prepared statement that you have, any prepared remarks that you have, looks like you all have some very beautifully prepared remarks, except for Mr. Andrews, without objection. Any, I know they're all prepared, but they're not in writing, but anything that you do have in writing, I just want you to know that unless any member here objects, does anyone object to having their statements appear in the record? Okay, I hear no objections, so I just want you to know that your beautifully prepared remarks will appear in the record in their entirety, and I say all that in an effort to encourage brevity and a summation. And so we're going to begin with the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Pitts, and then we'll go to Mr. Pallone, and then to Mr. Price, Mr. Levin, Mr. Rowe, and then Mr. Andrews. So welcome, Mr. Pitts. It's nice to see you here in the Rules Committee. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the Supreme Court has decided to leave Obamacare largely intact, it's now the job of the Congress to repeal this law in total. Since the law was enacted, the American people have consistently told us one thing. They do not like Obamacare. House Republicans heard their voice. We pledged to repeal the law and pave the way for real reform that lowers health care costs for families and employers across the country. And this bill is a reaffirmation of that important promise we made 2 years ago. Potentially passed with good intentions, the law will only serve to undermine health care quality, increase costs, fuel the nation's debt problem, and worsen an already anemic economic recovery. Americans want reform that delivers lower health care costs, and President Obama told the country that his reforms would lower family premiums by $2,500 by the end of his first term. In 2011, the annual premium for an employer-sponsored family plan soared past $15,000. That's a sharp 9% increase from 2010. Premiums will only skyrocket as the rest of the law is implemented, according to estimates from the CBO. Americans worry that a 2,700-page bill from Washington will damage the health coverage they have. The President told the country that if they liked their health care plan, they could keep it. Yet surveys of employers tell us that businesses will drop coverage for their employees in advance of the massive new government exchange program beginning in 2014. And not surprisingly, the CBO has estimated that up to 20 million Americans will lose their employer-provided health coverage because of the President's law. I think Americans realize that too much money is being spent in Washington, and the President told us that his law would cost a mere $900 billion. Yet only 2 years later, Obamacare's new entitlement program and a massive Medicaid expansion is estimated to cost taxpayers $1.8 trillion over the next decade. By backloading federal spending, the law didn't cut costs. It hid them from the American people and doubled down on Washington's fiscal recklessness. Americans want a Medicare program that they will be there for them and for future generations, and the President promised to strengthen the Medicare program and reform entitlements that are going bankrupt. The Medicare program faces $38.9 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Medicare savings should have been used to strengthen a program with shaky finances, yet the health care law took $575 billion from Medicare program to help pay for trillions in new entitlements spending. I could go on about IPAB and other promises that the President made on the individual mandate, that it was not a tax. The IRS will impose new taxes on medical devices, prescription drugs, health coverage, health premium health plans, and tanning services. The agency will impose new limits on health savings and flexible spending accounts. Employers will also face a tax for failing to provide government-approved health coverage and a new surtax on investment. And in all, $800 billion in taxes will crush Americans, poor and middle income and rich, with higher taxes and medical bills. We know about the religious and First Amendment rights issue. Archbishop Timothy Dolan, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, wrote that under the rule's narrow definition of religious employer, organizations must stop serving people of all faiths in their ministries or stop providing health coverage to their employees to qualify for an exemption. So many promises were made to the American people. The only way to honor and fulfill those promises is to support the repeal of Obamacare. I urge that you report the bill to the floor.
Mr. Pallone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Rules Committee. I'm here to testify in strong opposition to the Patients' Rights Repeal Act. I feel like this is an exercise in futility. I don't mean it disrespectfully, but I don't know how many times I've been before here, this committee or in the Energy and Commerce Committee. It just seems like almost every other day we have another effort to repeal the same thing over and over again. In the words of one of your Republican colleagues, Representative Jeff Flake, these votes mean nothing because, quote, we've already passed repeal 16 ways to Sunday. It seems to me it's been more than 16 times that we've, had a repeal bill before the Rules Committee, before my committee. It's like Groundhog Day around here. I'm just tired of it, and I think the American people are tired of it. I have to be honest, in the time that I was home over the last 10 days, not that many people mentioned the Affordable Care Act to me other than to say that they liked it and they were glad that the Supreme Court upheld it, but it wasn't the topic of the day. They were talking about the economy. They asked us to focus on the economy, create jobs, not litigate these old political battles that, are several years old now. I think what's happening is that, the Republicans waited before the Supreme Court, convinced that the Supreme Court was going to overturn the ACA. And when that didn't happen, now they have to figure they got to go back and repeal it again, which makes no sense to me. We had the battle. The Supreme Court said it's legitimate, it's constitutional. We should just move on. That's what my constituents are telling me. Now, Republicans claim that solving the nation's health care problems must begin with repeal of the Affordable Care Act. But once you've done that, then what? What do you have to replace it? I've said to Mr. Pitts and to other GOP members of our committee, every time they have another hearing on replacing part of the ACA, I never hear any proposal to what you're going to replace it with. And what are you going to say to all the American children who now get insurance regardless of their illnesses? What will you say to the 3.1 million young adults who are uninsured or now have insurance under their parents' plan? What are you going to say to the cancer patient who can now continue her chemotherapy because the law has outlawed annual coverage limits? This is what you're saying if you repeal this bill is that these people are just out of luck. The Republicans are more interested in protecting insurance companies' interests rather than protecting patients' rights. The truth is only insurance companies gain from repeal. The Patients' Rights Repeal Bill means that insurance companies will be put back in charge. Insurance companies will once again be allowed to deny health coverage to breast cancer patients who are in remission but now need to restart their chemo, or put an annual cap on the amount of care a person has, or even worse, a lifetime limit on health coverage for people who are desperate. I don't know. I just don't understand this. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it just seems we've done this before. Don't continue to do it. Don't waste our time. The critical issue before Congress isn't whether we should go back to the old health care system. We can't go back. The status quo was unsustainable, and it failed the American public. The issue before us now should be going to accelerate economic growth and adding jobs. That's all people were talking to me about over the last 10 days. They want the country to move forward, and you have to stop looking backwards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the committee. I'm honored to represent the Ways and Means Committee in the presentation of this and urge the reporting favorably out of this bill. I agree with Mr. Pallone. The status quo is unacceptable. There's no doubt about it. As a physician, I can tell you that it doesn't work for patients, it doesn't work for docs, it doesn't work for employers either. The problem is that the President's law has made things worse. And so with the Supreme Court ruling that it's constitutional doesn't mean that it's good policy for the country. In fact, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court said, and I quote in his opinion, the court does not express any opinion on the wisdom of the Affordable Care Act. Under the Constitution, that judgment is reserved to the people. And as the people's representatives, it's important for us to act when the people say that they would like something addressed. Remember what the law does. It removes $500 billion from Medicare. $500 billion from Medicare. 2, it puts in place the Independent Payment Advisory Board, a 15-member board of unelected bureaucrats to deny the payment for services for seniors. Sole purpose, deny payment for services for seniors. The President said famously over and over and over again, if you like what you have, you can keep it. Well, the people now know that if they like what they have, they probably won't be able to keep it. Many of them have already lost the coverage that they had before. It's more expensive than anybody ever imagined. Current original estimates, $900 billion. Now it's at $1.76 trillion for the next 10 years and only going higher. As a physician, again, I can tell you that it is destructive of the physician-patient relationship. And doctors and patients are learning that. And then the ability for us to innovate as a nation in the area of health care is compromised significantly by this bill. So what's changed? Well, the Supreme Court ruled, and they ruled that it's being paid for by a tax that very few individuals in this chamber would have allowed to have been adopted had they known that it was going to be a tax. So we believe that there's a better way. We also believe that folks back home in very personal stories are telling us the consequences of this bill. Small businesses who have 40 to 45 employees and would want to hire more say, I can't do that now because if I go over 50, then I get into that magic number where the federal government comes and forces me to provide health coverage that they want, not that my employees want, but that they want. I had a home health individual who owns a home health company just talked to me 2 weeks ago who said that if this comes to pass, they're going to have to lay off up to 15 people in order to comply with the costs of this law. So the consequences of this are destructive not only to the health of you and me and every American, it's destructive to the health of our economy. And so, yes, this is about the economy. This is about jobs. CBO says it will destroy 800,000 jobs if we allow this to go forward. So the new issue, Mr. Chairman, is that the playing field has changed. And the assessment of this law has changed. And consequently, it's incumbent upon us as the people's representatives to move forward and repeal this law.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price. Mr. Levin.
Thank you. Glad to be here again. Let me just boil it down. You wanted to summarize. Made it worse. If you vote to repeal, you turn it back to the insurance companies. Made it worse. 17 million kids with pre-existing conditions can no longer be denied coverage. 17 million. Made it worse. Over 100 million Americans no longer face lifetime limits. Made it worse in terms of rebates for insurance company charges. Almost 13 million Americans are going to get rebates because of this law, coming to more than $1 billion. Made it worse, over 5 million Americans on Medicare will have saved $4 billion in prescription drugs. Made it worse. By the way, you voted for a similar provision regarding Medicare payments twice. Made it worse for children, kids. They're not kids anymore. I call my kids kids when they're not kids. Young adults, over 6 million, 6.5 million, who remain on their parents' plan until age 26. You talk about repeal and replace. All we've heard is repeal. There's no plan to replace. None. So let me just close by saying a word about this notion of a mandate, which came from Republicans in the first place. This law, built on private insurance, but reformed, was modeled after the Massachusetts law proposed by Mitt Romney. I'll sum it up this way. In so many respects, the mandate and otherwise, Obamacare is Romneycare. The penalty under the tax provisions is held by the Supreme Court. It's estimated that it will apply to 1.4% of the Americans. 1.4%. So let me just close this way. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. There have been bills proposed to try to help create more jobs in this country. And instead of our coming forth a Ways and Means Committee with proposals relating to jobs, we come for the 31st time, we don't, you do, with a bill to repeal, which is going nowhere.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levin. Mr. Rowe.
I thank the chairman and ranking member. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I serve on the Education Workforce Committee and spent 30-plus years practicing medicine. I've been through a health care reform in the state of Tennessee with a TennCare plan. And in my district of Tennessee, 3 out of 4 people want this bill overturned and replaced with common sense reforms. And in the last 2 years, I had the privilege to serve with my good friend here, Rob Andrews, on the Health, Employment, Labor, and Pension Subcommittee, and we've held 2 hearings outside of Washington. That's a novel idea, to actually go out where the people are, talk to them about what they want and how it's going to affect business. And I've been to Evansville, Indiana, and Butler, Pennsylvania. Let me tell you what's going on in these businesses and in my own home community. We have a grocery store chain, 10,000 employees. I spoke to him on Friday. He said, Phil, I have a lot of temporary employees that I hire because the grocery business, people get off from work in the afternoon, you've got to have temporary people to work when they come in. He said, I'm working them 3 hours a week. I'm going to have to cut those back to in the 20s because of what this will cost my business. I talked to a restaurant owner in a small community in my state that has 5 restaurants. He's going to close 2 of them. That's 300 jobs that go away. In my local community hospital, I've been there 35 years in that community. For the first time in 35 years, they've laid off 168 people and didn't fill 90 jobs because they're concerned, the uncertainty about this bill. And I also, Mr. Chairman, am, as a practicing physician, realize that I've read the 2,700-page bill, and already we have 13,000 pages of rules and regulations, and does anybody in this room believe that those 13,000 pages of rules and regulations are going to make it easier for me as a physician and easier for that patient to come in and see me? There is a much simpler and better way to do it. No question, all of my colleagues have said cost is a major issue, access is an issue, and liability. 2 of those 3 things we did not even touch on. That's the cost, because it's going up. We did nothing to bend the cost curve. And number 2, we did nothing for liability in this, which also drives the cost. So I'm here in support of this bill, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rowe. Mr. Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I thank the ladies and gentlemen of the Rules Committee for their hours. Thank you. A job-killing health, that's a first. That's right, that they turn the microphone on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's usually the other way around. But already a sign of comity. We've heard the rhetoric reiterated that this is a job-killing health care bill. Since the President signed the health care bill, companies in our country have created 4.3 million private sector jobs. We've heard that the bill hurts Medicare because it withdraws $500 billion from Medicare. Well, here's how it does that. It tells insurance companies that we're being paid 114% for the same services that regular Medicare was paying 100% for, that they can't do that anymore. And if this was such a bad thing, I would say to you that my Republican friends have voted at least twice in their budget resolutions to do exactly the same reductions in Medicare, for which I commend them. We've heard that this is an enormous tax increase on the American people. As Mr. Levin said, the penalties for failure to have health insurance will affect 1.4% of the American people, and that's the 1.4% who can afford health insurance, but who opt not to buy it so that when they use an emergency room, their neighbor pays their bill instead. The investment surtax that we heard about from my friend from Pennsylvania affects about 2% of American households. We've heard that small businesses are troubled. Well, small businesses are troubled by a lack of customers and a lack of credit. But as far as this is concerned, if you have 50 or fewer full-time employees, you're obligated to do nothing under the new health care law. And finally, we've heard that this bill comes between doctors and patients. Well, tell that to the breast cancer survivor who can't afford a doctor when the insurance company tells her that because of her pre-existing condition, she can't have insurance anymore. That's coming between the doctor and the doctor's patient. Tell it to the Medicare recipient who is receiving between $600 and $800 a year in rebates for their prescription drugs and will no longer be able to afford their Coumadin or their other medicine. That's coming between a doctor and a patient. So what's coming between doctors and patients is the poorly considered destruction of these hard-earned rights of the American consumer. This is a debate we should not be having. We should be having a cooperative effort to create jobs in our country. But if we must have this debate, let's have it based on the facts and not on stale, disproven misrepresentations of 2 years ago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews. Thanks to all of you. I have no questions, but let me just very briefly say, first, there are a number of items we have brought forward. You mentioned the issue, Mr. Andrews, of taxes on small business. We've had a number of measures focused on small businesses. I'm very happy the President of the United States has signed those. And so every day we are proceeding with items that will address both of the issues that Messrs. Pallone and Andrews mentioned here, because job creation and economic growth is key. I think the reason that we're here is that the Court made its decision, and as Mr. Price has pointed out, the Chief Justice made it very clear. They're not passing an opinion on the legislation itself. They made a determination about constitutionality. That decision was made, and I think that it showed how important the United States Congress as an institution is. And frankly, an issue that I think is important to raise is the tax issue. If, and Mr. Price alluded to this, if we had had the kind of straightforward approach on the tax issue that the Supreme Court determined is in fact the case, this would not have passed. It would not have passed because repeatedly we were told that it is not a tax. Now, on the issue of no alternative, now, I've consistently argued that there are 5 simple things that if we'd done at the outset would have immediately played a role in diminishing the cost of health insurance and health care itself. And some of them are items that have been included. I do believe that my state of California has a structure in place to deal with pre-existing conditions. It's a pooling process, which I think is one that is worthy of consideration because, well, I don't think that someone who is diagnosed with a massive tumor should the next day be able to have millions and millions and millions of dollars of health care provided. I do believe that there can be a structure to deal with the issue of pre-existing conditions. Second, the expansion of medical savings accounts is something that has proven to provide an opportunity for people to put dollars aside to plan for their health care needs. Association health plans. Now, we passed out of the House of Representatives we passed out of the House of Representatives, when my party was in the majority in the past, association health plans. It allows for small businesses to come together and get lower rates as larger corporations do. And that has been done. Guess what happened? Because we were consistently told we offered no alternative at all. We passed it out of the House of Representatives, and it died in the Democratic-controlled United States Senate when we did that. We also need to have real, meaningful lawsuit abuse reform. Now, you all have mentioned that. The President of the United States stood in the House chamber and argued in behalf of meaningful lawsuit abuse reform, and yet we know that this measure does not do that. And the fifth point, which again the President said he supported, and that is for us to move in the direction that will allow for the purchase of insurance across state lines. Those 5 things that I've consistently talked about for a number of years, what I believe play a role in immediately bringing that cost down. And let me just, again, I don't have any questions for you, but let me just close before I call on Mr. Sessions by saying the following. We want to repeal this so that we can, in fact, replace. There is a need. We all recognize the need. Priority is job creation and economic growth, but this is a need that has to be addressed. When we considered it as an institution, it was done under the most closed structure imaginable for an issue of this magnitude. And without dredging up all of those old arguments, I will tell you that for those who may have forgotten, there was a plan that was in place right up until we considered this that would have allowed us to self-enact this measure, reporting it out of this committee, taking it to the floor, and simply passing a rule which would have passed this measure. What we want to do is what we've done in this Congress. Very simple. What we want to do is we want to have the kind of process that we have had in dealing with issues. We want to do it in a bipartisan way. We want to make amendments that our minority colleagues will offer in order as we proceed with this. And so I think that the notion of what we're trying, I see your hand up, and I'll recognize you if you want to respond. I'm not asking a question. I'm simply stating my response to what I've heard in your testimony. We will, after we repeal this, after we get this thing through, we will do this, and we'll include Democrats. I mean, some of the things I've just mentioned of my 5 items are items that Democrats have supported. And yet, this was not done under the kind of process that the American people deserve. And let me, Mr. Pallone has been asking me, but if you'd like me to yield before I recognize Mr. Pallone, sure.
I just had a question.
Sure. I'm happy.
All these areas of common ground that you mentioned, my question is, why didn't you enact any of them when you were had the White
We
House
did.
and you were in charge of Congress?
If I could reclaim my time,
there was
if I could reclaim my time,
discrimination against women because
if I could reclaim my time, I don't know if I can reclaim my time or not, but I mean, I think I have the
You're in
gavel.
charge.
Thank you. We did. We did. And I just said that. I don't know if you were listening to me. I don't know if you're familiar with the issue of association health plans. It enjoyed bipartisan support here in this chamber. We passed it when our party was in the majority. We passed it when people were saying that we did nothing to deal with this issue. We sent it to the Democratic control. Would the gentleman like me to yield? I'm happy to yield to my friend.
They did not ban discrimination against children with pre-existing conditions. They did not.
If I could reclaim my time, I never said that we did everything. What I said is that I mentioned these 5 items that would play a role in immediately reducing the cost of health insurance and direct health care costs. We were often told, and it was just said in the testimony here, that we have no alternative, we've offered no ideas, there is no proposal whatsoever to replace. When the Republicans were in the majority in the House of Representatives last, we passed the plan for association health plans that would have allowed the small business men and women about whom you regularly talk to pool together and get lower insurance rates as larger companies do. We passed that plan out of the House of Representatives. We sent it to the Democratic-controlled United States Senate, and it died there. Okay? So let me first recognize Mr. Pallone. And again, I'm not asking a question. I just said that.
I know, and I'm going to be brief, Mr.
I'm getting ready to recognize Mr. Sessions.
I just wanted to say, some of the things.
What have we done wrong? Am I not allowed to? Am I not allowed to question the witnesses?
But it would strike me that we should do it the way we normally do.
Okay. Mr. Pallone.
I was just going to say briefly, some of the things you mentioned, I think, are good ideas, and actually we've, addressed malpractice and some of those things. But I think that the difference between those five and this comprehensive health care reform is that with the ACA, you're basically going to make sure that something like 98, 99% of Americans have health insurance. I think with those items, they're important, some of them, and in some ways I would support some of them, and even have. But I just don't think they're going to make that kind of a dent. I mean, they'll help a few people here and there on the edge, but they're not going to provide the type of coverage that they're going to get with the ACA. And as far as the tax is concerned, right now, I actually think that the ACA results in a tax cut, because we know in New Jersey that people who have insurance now are paying about $1,000 to $1,500 per year of their premium to cover people who don't have insurance. So if everybody's covered through this mandate, which I know you don't like the mandate, then it's actually a tax cut for the people who are paying those premiums right now, because they shouldn't have to pay for the people who are irresponsible, in my opinion.
Well, I'm just stating what the United States Supreme Court ruled with a majority vote. Let me just say that I hope that this committee, I'm going to request of this committee that we make a great deal of amount of time available on the House floor to engage in debate. That's the reason I'm not asking any questions. Everybody knows where we stand on this. I think that the opportunity to move to the floor is something that I really want to see possible. I just was responding to the testimony that I heard and outlining some of the things that I thought should be responded to. So I'd like to recognize Mr. Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of our colleagues who've taken time to be here with us today, and I think I'm going to do the same thing that Chairman did, and that is just address the things the way I see them. And I do recognize we're talking past each other to say that this is going to be a tax cut for many people. I've never heard that argument before. What I will go immediately to is the Supreme Court says it's a tax. So it's a tax. Now that we know this, the Supreme Court, whether we like whatever the Supreme Court said or not, they, as I've heard at least once today, Marbury versus Madison became the law of the nation because of the Supreme Court, and so is this. What we can't escape is the cost. The cost is times 2. So I would say to you that means that if we do not repeal the bill, then we're going to have to figure out how we double the taxes, how we go and pay for the bill. We already know, and we heard at least one gentleman, as Mr. Andrews said, I wish we were here find a way to cut taxes for small business. We are. We're going to repeal the bill. Wish we could do something about roads and bridges. We are, because half of this real cost falls on the states. States are having to pay the cost, and they don't coin money. So they are laying off people, and they have gone from essentially offering roads and bridges and services of education to now they're going to get in the health care business. We talked about the loss of jobs. Oh my gosh, I am sorry there have been public sector job losses, but tried to say that there have been 4.3 million jobs added. Yes, but those have lagged behind tremendously by about 5 million. 4.3 have been created during the period of time since the bill was signed. Anemic. And everybody in this room knows that's anemic, and I am disappointed that somebody would try and say that we've done so great. In fact, we're not doing great. Someone tried to suggest they had the same bill as Republicans with how we treated Medicare. That's not true. Republicans said anybody 55 and over would not be impacted. Rather, we would plan for the future, and so anybody 54 and below would be impacted by a Republican bill. Today, every person, particularly those that are seniors, 80, 90 years old, immediately hit by $500 billion cut in Medicare. That is not the same as Republicans. It is not okay to say you do it as Republicans, because that's not true. Medical device tax. Spent time with a couple people back in Dallas, Texas during the break, and Granted, perhaps they're not as impacted necessarily by the bill. They are in the healthcare industry, but they are dentists. They're talking about chairs that they will have in their dental practice. They're talking about rubber bands that they will put in children's mouths. These are all going to be taxed with a medical device tax. The cost of now not just, quote, medicine, but also dental care will rise very substantially. So I go back to this point, even at a cost of twice as much, would this be a good deal? Heck no. Because if we did not take care of repealing it, we would have to double the tax. We would take $1 trillion, not $500 billion, $1 trillion out of senior care. Not the Republican side, but people who are 80, 90 years old who are on it today. We would double the cost on states. They're already staggeringly high. We would double the tax on small business. We would double down virtually everything about this bill, and instead of losing 800 million more jobs, which is considered the government estimate, private sector is over 1 million jobs are going to be lost between now and 2014. So I think the alternatives, when looked at, say that we should repeal the bill and start over. We should go back and look at the original testimony. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, was in here and he told me, Mr. Sessions, we're going to create millions and millions of additional and new jobs by this bill. That's not the way it turned out. So I think, looking back, we should go back and evaluate what we've done. We should find a way to make better the circumstances, and we should all get together, the President of the United States, the Senate, the House, listen to the American people, and come up with a better bill. But this is a very complicated mess. And the last point that I would make is, and I have heard insurance companies say many of the things which we've been told will go back into the dark ages to retrieve again, they've already agreed that they will stick with status quo. So to argue these cases is, in my opinion, not the right way. I think we need to understand it's either repeal or double down on the taxes, because the costs are twice that, and they will be very destructive if we are not smart enough to do something today. Lastly, the American public will have something to say about this. Every single person that votes here will be held accountable for their vote. Thank God we've gotten to the point where our vote matters. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. It's nice to see you on this pretty Monday afternoon. Mr. Pallone, you started by saying you feel like you voted on this about 16 times. Tomorrow will be 31, Mr. Pallone. And this is going to end up just like the rest, nowhere. We will drag this out for a couple of days because we don't have much work to do around here, because we sure don't want to do a jobs bill. We're going to avoid that at all costs. I think we need reminding here, those of us on my side who voted for the bill probably don't, but one of the reasons we got into this, and I think probably Theodore Roosevelt, when he tried to pass health care, had something the same thing in mind. Health care is approaching 18% of GDP. We can't afford it. We could be heading toward the time when all we can do is a war every now and then when somebody in the Senate would like to bomb somebody, and provide health care maybe, but very little else. We had to do it. I didn't want to do it so somebody could fling a brick through my Niagara Falls district office window or threaten my children by telling us they could take us down at 50 yards. That was not what I was here for, to try to do. There has been more talk about this bill, about more people who know nothing very much about what's in it than anything I've ever seen, and I would bet you, I'm so sorry I haven't had time to read the debates, but I would bet you my house and lot that the debate over Medicare and Social Security were about the same. Be the end of America as we know it. Everybody will stop work. The world coming to an end. For goodness sake, we have got to provide health care. We're the only industrial country on the face of the earth that puts this burden back on our employers. Why can't we try to stop and finally get to the point we need to be where we had the single-payer bill, which many of us wanted to do in the first place. We watered it down, we backed it off, and now we have got what we've got today, and I'm very proud of it, frankly. For the life of me, I don't know why it's going to cause all these lost jobs, why people are going to shut down their restaurants. If they have fewer than 50 employees, they're not even involved in this health care bill. If they have more than that, there's even, if a small business, I think they get some deduction, tax deduction. I'm sure Mr. Andrews will make this clear, Mr. Levin, for providing health care insurance. And then the exchanges will provide it for people who simply cannot afford to do it. It is taking care of, this is a way to save money. I'm trying desperately. It seems to me like it was $23 billion. Some of the CBO said that over 10 years we could save if this bill really went into effect. And remember, it hasn't. So all the dire things everybody's talking about still is just conjecture. But I believe that was the cost. Now, this has not been scored by CBO, this bill here. What are we doing to get rid of it? We don't know what changes would be made. But we did know that it was going to be very costly to do away with it. Am I right? Do you all remember it that way, all of you, all six? That it would be very difficult to do away with it because of cost. But more than that, what is astonishing to me, well, I think before I finish here, somebody's got to speak up for women in this country, because you repeal this bill and women are going to continue as they have from the beginning. I don't even know if all women know this. We single women particularly pay more money for the same insurance that a man has because they're female. Did you know that? You want to go back to that? You haven't had enough trouble this year with war against women's health. Please, I mean, that's something I really think I've got to say. One other thing, as far as I'm concerned, I think this ought to be called the Obamacare. It is, everybody knows, it's placed on, Mr. McGovern can talk about this, but this is the Massachusetts health care plan writ large. And Massachusetts people love it. And very few people of them pay you the tax or the mandate or the penalty or whatever you want to call it. But it's absolutely true that all these years that we've been paying insurance premiums for health care, we're paying at least $1,000, I think more, because that was the figure we heard 10 years ago, because of people who do not have care to help pay for uncompensated care. My family would love to save that money. I'd love for my children's families to be able to save that money and pay for their own health care, but not have to carry other people who simply don't want to do it. I've thought in a moment of madness, really, that maybe if all the people who decided not to have health care would also say that I will never go to the doctor, or no matter what happens to me, I'm not going to the hospital, that we should let them have that choice. But we know they're not going to do that, and we know we're not the kind of people who would allow them to do that, because that's not the way this country goes. But I'd like to know, and let me ask anybody who can tell me, what's going to happen to the millions of seniors now who have already gotten the preventive care that they get with no co-payments? What's going to happen to the donut hole? What will happen to all the children, I think 360,000 at least, you may have a better figure, who are on health care because they are on their parents' health care, because there are no jobs for them when they get out of college, or they can't afford health care? What's going to happen to all the children? All the children. This is one of the most heartbreaking ones, and why are we going to do this? Who have pre-existing conditions, the way they were born, and they are not insurable in the United States of America. If you have a critical head injury, you can use up your yearly limit in almost no time, and you're uninsurable for the rest of your life in the United States of America. You go over your yearly limit, and you may not have more insurance, no matter what happens to you, until the following year. Is this what we want? That's what we got. Who wants to go back to that? But what I want, I see our hands going up here. Let me try to get off my high horse here. But this is the second time I've gone through this. And if American people don't want health care, I want to promise you that in my years in Congress, not a living soul has ever said to me, gee, I love my health care. Oh, I sure do hope that you all won't try to ever do anything about it. People, well, we know already, what is it, 46, 46? People oppose and people against. I think you're really biting off an awful lot to chew. And frankly, I have too much fondness for all of you on the Republican side. I know none of you voted for it, but I would like to save you from yourselves, because people are going to like this bill. And you're going to have to pay an awful price for fighting it like this. So let's reconsider and close up and go home and see if we can find something else to do this week to fill the time. What do you say? But first answer my question on what is going to happen to all those people already taking advantage of a health care bill who will lose it. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you.
Weren't you an author of the bill?
I'm not an author of this repeal bill, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the things I find astonishing about this is that the Congressional Budget Office has not yet scored this bill.
Right.
So no one can say whether the repeal of this bill will add to or subtract from the deficit. Now, we do know that the first time of the 31 that there was an attempt to repeal the bill, that the Congressional Budget Office said that repeal of the bill would add far in excess of $200 billion to the deficit. Now, there have been changes since then regarding the Class Act and regarding the Medicaid provisions. So I don't know whether repeal of the bill adds to or subtracts from the deficit, but neither does anyone else. So I would say, Madam Ranking Member, it would seem to me in the interest of prudence that we ought to at least put off consideration of the repeal bill until the Congressional Budget Office has said what it's going to cost or what it's going to add to the deficit.
We almost always
And I can't think of a major piece of legislation that has ever been brought to the House floor in my tenure here where the Congressional Budget Office has not given us a score and said whether it's going to add or subtract the deficit. I'm just curious to why it's being done here.
Mr. Andrews, I think I've figured that out. A cynic might think, having gone on this debate since 2010, about replacing, that we would have some idea now of what we would replace it with. So a cynic might think that probably nothing, that we will go back to what we had before. But we're not making law here. What we're doing here is making political points. And I think Politico pointed that out pretty much, that that's what we'll expect for the rest of the session.
Yeah, ma'am, I just wonder,
Sure.
Yes.
There'll be a lot of rhetoric, and that will be it. You know, as you look back, the Republican Party has had decades to come up with a comprehensive health plan. Decades.
Well, President Nixon did.
There's never been a comprehensive health plan proposed by the Republicans, and now the Democrats have passed it. And so essentially we have sniping at it. That's the answer.
I won't take personal offense at Republicans not offering a comprehensive plan, because we've had a comprehensive plan that we offered prior to the President's law. H.R. 3000, I'd be glad to go over with you lock, stock, and barrel.
And restored is essentially adding nobody to the rows of the
Actually, we get 30 to 50 million folks insured. We solve the insurance challenges of portability and pre-existing in ways that allow individuals to have the kind of health coverage that they want, not that the government dictates to them, and we save hundreds of billions of dollars. But I want to address the issue that you talk about, because it's extremely important. First, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that the law hasn't taken effect and had any effect, but what are we going to do about all those folks?
Yes, small portions of it.
But there are significant portions. And to address the issue of pre-existing is incredibly important, because you don't ever hear about folks being challenged with a pre-existing illness or injury who are in the self-insured market, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, the Coca-Colas, those folks. Those aren't the folks that are challenged. You hear the challenge for those in the individual and the small group market. That's about 18 million people.
And for the uninsured.
Exactly right.
Price, I've known, and I know you have, women who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, but there's no treatment for them. That happens.
Exactly, but and that's what I like to address. But if I may tangentially talk about breast cancer, because you'll recall that what the United States Pathological Task Force did, the USPTF did, is to say that women under the age of 50 didn't need a screening mammogram. It took an act of Congress for us to say, oh, yes, they do.
Right.
Because that decision ought to be between a patient and a physician. And what this law does is makes it so that decision between a patient and a physician cannot occur unless there's an act of Congress.
Well, so what we did there, let me also point that out, if I may just claim my time for a second. That, again, was the women of the Congress of the United States who said, oh, no, you're not going to treat us.
Well,
We've had to do that.
it was many of us. It was all of us, as a matter of fact.
Since the beginning of time,
all of
almost.
us. And then in terms,
Women don't want to be treated
Mammographs
And-
under Medicare and the opposition to it. Go back
if
to
I,
that.
if I may, in terms of,
in
pre-existing illnesses and injuries, the fact of the matter is, it's about 18 million folks who are challenged with that, and they are, and it needs to be addressed. And the way to address it,
Until this bill.
and the way to address it is to make certain that those individuals have access to the same kind of pooling mechanisms
Yeah.
that exist for folks in the large group in the self-insured
And
arena,
this bill
so
does
that
that.
they can
This
select
bill
the
does
insurance
that.
that they want, not that the government wants for them. That's the
what the
key.
exchanges are. They have their choice. But we're not going to debate the bill now. We're going to debate what all of you guys are going to say. And as I said, I have great affection for you. You know that. I just feel badly for you when you get home and women realize they're going to have to be paying more, and all those other people that they have no access to health care because something happened to them and they're no longer insurable. I just don't want you to have to face that.
If I could just say one thing that you had mentioned, I know that that a lot of the Republicans give the impression that if this was repealed, that all these discriminatory practices, pre-existing conditions, kids, that all those things are going to continue. Fact of the matter is they're not going to continue. And don't believe the insurance companies when they tell you that they will. Because the insurance companies bought into this and supported this bill knowing that everyone would be covered and they'd have a lot more people paying into the system, and therefore didn't have to worry about pre-existing conditions and lifetime benefits and rescissions and all that. Once they get to the point where these people who are going to have coverage under the bill don't because the bill is repealed, those discriminatory practices will go back into place because that's the way that's the way they make money, you see? So I don't like I think Mr. Dreyer said, and again, no disrespect, well, the insurance companies are going to keep these protections in place. They're not going to. They may say it initially, but 6 months down the road, a year down the road, they'll go back to them again because that's the only way that they can make money, absent all these additional people that would be in the insurance pool under the ACA.
All right. Then I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Thank you very much. Let me just say that it's approaching 6 o'clock, and we've gone through just a couple of members of the Rules Committee. And again, I'm hoping that this committee will make an order a lot of time for debate on the House floor. And then we're going to have a vote on this issue, and I think these are interesting issues that we brought forward. But I look forward to having it expand on the House floor. So, well, we want to go through. It's true, we do have other witnesses, and I know that we have votes coming in just a little while on the floor, but let me recognize Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to associate myself very strongly with your comments and the comments of Mr. Sessions. I won't repeat those things that you said, but and I'm not going to be asking any questions either, but I do think some comments that have been made need to be responded to. I say this often on the floor and occasionally in the Rules Committee, but I want to say to anyone who has not read the book 1984 or who hasn't read it in a long time that I'd really like to urge people to read that book, because I think we're in many ways living through that experience described in that book, and talk about things being rewritten, and it's just sort of fascinating to hear the comments being made here. I think Mr. Pallone in particular gives a great example of some of the things talked about in 1984. You say only the insurance companies are going to gain from the repeal, but the reason the insurance companies, Obamacare is a great handout to insurance companies from my perspective. You want to make us look like we're supporting the insurance companies, but it was you all who went hand in hand with the insurance companies. You set it up so they couldn't lose. You made them regulated utilities. They're guaranteed a profit every year as a result of the individual mandate. And so it's the Democrats who are helping the insurance companies, and that point has not been made. Yet you talk out of both sides of your mouth, and that's such a perfect example, again, of what goes on in the book 1984. allowing them to do that, allowing them to create this regulated utility helps the insurance companies. And then you say only they gain from the repeal. No, Mr. Pallone, the American people gain from the repeal of this. We gain our freedom again. The difference between the liberals in this country and the conservatives is the issue of freedom. You and your colleagues want the government to control every aspect of our lives. We do not believe in that. We want this to continue to be the greatest country in the world. And what makes us the greatest country in the world? The rule of law and the freedom that we have, along with our Judeo-Christian beliefs and our capitalistic system. And Obamacare is an assault on all of those things. You know, the president said in 2008, this is the greatest country in the world. Now help me change it. And I just thought that should have been played over and over and over again, because I think that's the attitude that many of you who side with the president on everything feel. I'd also like to say that you encourage us to stop looking backwards. I hope you'll give that advice to your president, to President Obama, because he continues to blame President Bush for everything that's negative in this country. So if you want us to stop looking backwards, I hope you will talk about that. I will say to Mr. Andrews, I appreciate the fact that you've said companies have created 4 million jobs in this country in the last few years. Thank you for not being like other witnesses have been who've come to this committee who've said, I or we have created these jobs. The administration has not done that. It is the private sector who've created the jobs. The other thing I think that's important to talk about is the fact that somebody mentioned 98% of Americans get insurance under this bill. However, before Obamacare was passed, there were only about 10 million Americans who wanted health insurance who couldn't afford health insurance. It was somewhere along around that number. And we could have taken care of that with the things that our colleagues have talked about, and Republicans did do that. Comprehensive health care. I love that expression that you all use when you want, again, a government takeover of some issue. Let it be comprehensive. And that's the code word, I think, for that. My colleague from New York mentioned that college grads need to be covered by Obamacare because they can't get jobs. Well, Republicans have sent over 30 bills over to the Senate that would help create an environment for creating jobs. We on the Republican side know the government doesn't create jobs, but we help create an environment. So we need to look at not the symptoms, we need to look at the causes. And the causes that are forcing so many young people not to be able to get jobs after their college education is that the economy is in such bad shape and we're spending so much money at the federal level. I also want to say that our motives are often impugned on this side of the aisle by our colleagues. The implication is that we don't care about women, we don't care about children if we don't vote for government takeover of our lives. But I'd like to point out to my colleagues that there were many Democrats, over 30 Democrats, who voted no on the Obamacare bill. And I suspect that there will be some Democrats who will vote to repeal it when we vote to repeal it. And so I'm sure my colleagues aren't going to impugn their motives or impugn their integrity when they do that, because I don't do that. I think that there are people who understand the difference between freedom and lack of freedom and what we do when we give the government so much control. And our colleague, Mr. Price, has pointed out, we want patient-centered health care. We want patients and doctors to make decisions, not a 15-member, unelected, unaccountable board of people to be deciding who is going to be getting health care in this country. And that's what you have when you have Obamacare. That's the kind of thing that we want to get rid of. All these other problems can be dealt with, and they can be dealt with, as my colleague from California so well stated. And in many cases, they are being taken care of. HSAs were in existence, and yet Obamacare does everything possible to destroy them. It doesn't allow for association health plans, doesn't allow for real liability reform. It doesn't allow for purchase across state lines. So there are many things. I also hear my colleagues talking out of both sides of their mouths on the prescription drug plan. Many of them have lambasted that program. On one day, they'll scream about how it's not paid for. On the other hand, they say, but we have to close the donut hole. I mean, what is it, guys? You voted against it when it came up before. And I probably would have voted against it too, because I don't like more government programs. But come on, you're being hypocritical when you say we've got to fill the donut hole when you lambast it in many cases. So I think that, again, even my colleagues probably need to read the book 1984, and maybe they'll see a little bit of themselves in the things that are in there in terms of how you rewrite history and how you make things sound great that aren't great. The loss of freedom in this country is really putting us at risk long term, and that is my greatest concern about this bill and the taking away from individuals the ability to make decisions about their health care. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Oh, boy. You know, Dr. Fox, it's funny how to hear you talk about impugning motives. Just now, I'm pretty sure I've been called a big brother totalitarian who wants to take everybody's freedom away. So I think we ought to be careful about some of the rhetoric we use, and I would urge my colleague to maybe to replay some of her speeches because that was pretty harsh. My colleague, Mr. Sessions, talked about taxes. Well, let me just say for the record that my constituents in Massachusetts are sick and tired of paying for people in Texas who can afford coverage but choose not to get coverage. We end up paying for that. And the Affordable Health Care Act actually provides my constituents with a tax cut. And I should also point out to my colleagues on the other side that your standard bearer, Mitt Romney, who is the co-author of the Massachusetts Health Care Plan, last week said that this was not a tax. I mean, I stand corrected. This week he changed his mind. But, you know, whatever. You own him. He's yours. Good luck. He'll be all over the place on this by the time this campaign is over with. But the bottom line is that this notion of making sure that everybody has the freedom to have access to good quality health care is something that motivated me to vote for this bill. Because everybody in this country doesn't have the freedom to be able to afford good quality health care. The status quo was unacceptable. The status quo was bad. Now, I'm glad to hear that we don't have to worry about anything. The insurance companies are all have our best interests at heart. So we can repeal all of these requirements that ban discrimination against children who have pre-existing conditions that, as my colleague Louise Slaughter pointed out, the provision that forbids insurance companies from discriminating against women because it used to be that being a female was a pre-existing condition. That's been banned. But if we lift all of these, the requirements of the Affordable Health Care Act and take away all these requirements on insurance companies to actually behave responsibly, that they will just do that. One of the reasons why we need to do this is because insurance companies haven't behaved responsibly throughout the years. And too many of our citizens have paid a heavy price for that. I wanted to begin my comments by saying enough already. I mean, this is our 31st time we're repealing some part or all of the Affordable Health Care Act. That was one of the first things you guys did when you came to power. I mean, you got us all on record. If this is all about politics, and I guess I'm reading Politico today, and it says GOP's pre-recess plan, push for hot button votes. If that's all this is about, you've got us 30 times. How many more times do you want us to be on record on this? The fact of the matter is, you already have. If this is a campaign issue for you, fine. But if you and Mitt Romney want to run on the platform of saying, we're going to leave it up to states or insurance companies to decide whether or not it's okay to discriminate against kids with pre-existing conditions. If you want to run on the platform by saying we're going to stop closing that donut hole and increase the cost of prescription drugs on senior citizens, if you're going to run on the platform by saying, let the insurance companies or individual states decide whether or not women should be discriminated against, if that's your platform, go at it. I welcome that debate, quite frankly. But the fact of the matter is, and I appreciate the chairman of the Rules Committee saying, well, to give you lots of time on this. You know what? I don't want lots of time on this. I want lots of time on a jobs bill. You stalled and stalled and stalled on the transportation bill. We finally got that done. I mean, that should have been passed months ago. That would have put, tens of thousands of people to work. We should be spending hours tomorrow on debating the president's jobs proposals or your jobs proposals. But 7 hours or 8 hours on this, I mean, it's going nowhere. The Senate's not taking it up. Even if it did, the president's not going to sign it to law. This is not going to happen. Mr. Andrews?
Provision in this bill that there would be a committee that would meet and decide who gets a heart transplant and who doesn't. It was false, it is false, and it will always be false. And the other thing I must say I'm a little saddened about, my friend from North Carolina yielded back before she took any comments, but I respect her very much and I know the sincerity of her views. But it was hurtful to hear her refer to the President of the United States as, quote, your president, when speaking to Democratic members. And I would simply say this to you, that I didn't agree with hardly anything he did, but George W. Bush was my president. And I never voted for him, but Ronald Reagan was my president. And I disagree with him most of the time, but George H.W. Bush was my president. And I'm just saddened by the fact that we somehow reached the point in this country where, for whatever reason, we don't have one president who represents all of us. And I think we should get beyond that kind of rhetoric and, frankly, beyond this bill to talk about what really matters in this country, which is jobs, as you said.
Mr. Pallone?
Being amazed at how much Congresswoman Fox and I have in common, because actually I had been reading 1984 rather recently. But I think the thing that bothers me about what she said is this notion of freedom. In other words, in my idea of freedom is, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. It's not the freedom not to have health care. And the problem is, I really look at it from a responsibility point of view, which is what the Republicans often talk about. In other words, it's not fair, if you will, that people not take responsibility for their own lives. And why should so many of us be paying these large premiums and bills for people who don't decide to have health care? Now, I also, health insurance, but I also think that the other thing you said that I don't agree with is there are a lot of people out there that want health insurance, millions, probably 30, 40 million, and can't get it because they can't afford it. And a lot of others who are underinsured because they can't buy a good, decent benefit package. So we're not only talking about these 40 million people who will have health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, but also maybe another 40 million who are underinsured and can't get coverage for the things that they need coverage for because they're going to have a basic benefit package and be able to buy affordable insurance with the subsidy and the benefits that are provided under the ACA. And finally, with regard to the insurance companies, when I say that if you repeal this, the insurance companies are the only ones that are going to benefit, I say that because they'll go back to what I said before. In other words, they'll go back to discriminatory practices, pre-existing conditions, lifetime limits, rescissions, all those other things. Not because that they're evil necessarily, I'm not suggesting that, but because if you don't take in everybody and guarantee everyone has insurance because you have a much larger pool, they're almost forced to go back to the old ways in order to make a profit. It's not a question of who's evil. It's just what I'm saying is that you would allow us to go back to the old system where all these discriminatory practices take place and where that's how the insurance companies make money. Not because they're bad people, but because that's the only way they can make money under the old system. The way they make money under the new system is by covering everyone, which is the perfect, responsible thing to do. I yield back.
And let me just conclude.
Mr. McGovern, would you give me 30 seconds?
Yeah, sure.
Because I've been here a few years, and I say this respectfully to Dr. Fox, I guess, as she's leaving. I think her comment in using 1984, which I read some years ago, illustrates how very difficult it is to get anything done here. When you frame the issue in terms of 1984, it is so misguided and so totally polarizing. And if that's the mindset of this Republican Party, we'll never get anything done.
And I appreciate that. I mean, look, I just conclude with a couple of final observations. One is on January 20th, I think we voted on the first repeal. We were promised that, that the Republican majority here in the House, which runs the floor, would have a bill that would preserve a patient's ability to keep his or her health plan if he or she likes it, provide people with pre-existing conditions access to affordable care, increase the number of uninsured Americans. We haven't seen that on the floor. So you've repealed, but you haven't brought anything on the floor to replace. The other thing is that, Dr. Fox mentioned that the President of the United States rightfully said that this is the greatest country on the planet. I think we all agree with that. That somehow you can't try to make the greatest country in the world even better is a little bit stunning to me. I mean, we all got elected because we want to improve the quality of life for the people that we represent. That's what we're here for. That's what the President of the United States is supposed to do. We're all supposed to do that. Improve the quality of life for people. This is the greatest country in the world. And if we can guarantee everybody in this country the right to have good quality health care, I think it makes us even greater. And just finally, again, I understand what's going on here, the hot button issues. I would just request that you give us a little less time on hot button issues. You want these votes for your campaign commercials so that these multi-gazillion-dollar super PACs can pummel us, fine. But we should be spending a little bit more time on jobs and a little less time on hot button issues. I yield back my time.
Thank you. I don't intend on going through the philosophy of this event, of this particular bill or issue within the ring here. With one caveat. See, I served in the state legislature before I came here. I'm perhaps different than the rest of my delegation whose first jobs were to come to Washington and thought that perhaps the way we do things in Washington is the way it ought to be done. But I appreciate the comments which have been made here because I didn't realize how incompetent I was as simply a state legislator, how much I didn't really care about issues, and that only once I breathed the rarefied air of the Potomac River I was able to make these kinds of decisions. The fact that Utah required health care to age 26 as family plan decades before anyone back here thought about it was, I guess, just an apparition of our inability of doing things. However, I do have a specific parochial question simply because I've never received an answer for it. And I don't know who wants to claim credit for this program, but if anyone could do that, now that we know it is a tax and it's been verified as a tax, the tax will be collected by the IRS. I have a center in my district. They're very good people that do a good job, but they are pressed to the max right now. If this program were to go through, who would be actually, how are you going to handle the process of having the tax verified through the IRS program and having people examine those types of things? Will you indeed outsource this program, as had been done in other programs, because the present IRS capacity to handle this is not there? There are some who have suggested it would be between 12,000 and 14,000 more people just to handle the program. I have to admit that there is some historical reference to that. When our tax program went from a class tax to a mass tax in World War II, we did indeed triple the number of IRS agents that had to handle that process. Same thing happened in World War II when the top rate went up to 75% and the bottom rate went from 0.4 to 25%. There was a significant increase in the number of individuals. I know the IRS employees who do a good job cannot handle the increase that will be mandated by this particular program. Is it the purpose then, is it the process or the plan, simply to outsource these jobs to a private sector, or is it to increase the number of IRS employees?
The answer is it will be handled responsibly. We will have the intelligence within this body to make sure that the law is implemented effectively.
So that means, obviously, you had a plan ahead of time. What was the purpose or plan in discussing this in the first place?
I mean, don't talk about conjuring up some master plan. There's enough intelligence in this body to rise to the occasion.
Well, then I'll ask the question. Let me ask the question again. Are you going to is the process of here, the plan is, to outsource this work, or are we going to hire more people inside? That's a legitimate question.
It is.
It should have been thought through.
The answer is that will be determined. I don't think there's any plan to outsource. There's a lot of outsourcing being done. That isn't being contemplated. But, you know,
so we will increase the number of IRS agents. That is
maybe so, but Mr. Bishop, we don't need to conjure up straw people. We'll handle that. There's enough intelligence in this body to respond to that. Don't sell us short.
Mr. Levin, I'm asking what the plan is. If you don't have a plan, say you don't have a plan. If the plan is to outsource, say it's to outsource. This is not a $64,000 question.
No, the answer is,
it could be answered.
The answer is that there will be implementation. Some of the provisions are not in place yet. Some are. You want to repeal what is in place. That's what you want to get rid of.
So,
and so now you conjure up what will happen with some of the provisions that haven't yet been implemented yet. The subsidy provisions and others haven't been implemented, and others haven't yet been. But you can't duck the very purpose, and that is for you to repeal what is already in place.
Mr. Andrews, can you give me an answer that's
Mr. Bishop, here's my understanding. I don't know exactly how they're going to implement it, but here's the way it would work for a taxpayer's point of view. When a person files their 1040, if they're provided health insurance through their W-2 will reflect the fact they have health insurance.
Yes.
If a person does not have a W-2, then he or she will have to file a schedule which indicates that they have health insurance, pretty much the same way you show that you make mortgage interest payments if you claim that deduction. If the person doesn't have that, there would be a penalty assessed as part of their federal tax, which would be added on. If they don't add it on, there would be the regular enforcement mechanism there is. Now, whether that requires more employees or not, I do not know. But I do know that the Treasury Department has presented a budget that assumes that this will be the law and provided the person power to get the job done.
And how many employees did they increase?
I do not know. I'd be happy to check the record of the appropriations request from the department, but I'm certain that the commissioner of the IRS has taken this into account. And again,
I appreciate. Let me reclaim the time.
That's the way it actually works in the real world.
I appreciate that. I also realize in the real world that the IRS center that we have in my district is maxed out right now. And in the past, other programs that were added to their responsibilities were indeed outsourced. Some of those programs did not necessarily work.
Well, for general yield, I would certainly join him in opposing any outsourcing.
Come on.
I would certainly join him in opposing
outsourcing. Said
outsourcing.
there, if it's indeed what you started to say and then backtrack, if the goal is not to outsource, I think that was the result of my question. And I think that's a legitimate answer, and I appreciate for that. I
said that, and that's true.
I do recognize, though, that historically, every time there has been an increase in the role of the IRS, and this would be one, there have been an increase in the number of agents that need to do that kind of work. I don't think that cannot be, I think, denied. It will not be done in existence.
Well, General Neal, When the mortgage interest deduction was added to the tax code, was there a spike in IRS agents? I don't know. Do you?
There was an outsourcing. And that's one of the problems
When the
that
mor-
we're dealing with.
When the mortgage interest deduction
That was so
first
long
made
ago.
available? I mean, was there a spike in IRS agents? Do you know?
I'm making the assumption that there was because that's what I think it is. I may be inaccurate in that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I will yield to you.
Look, we've got a whole bunch of people that know better than I, but I've tried to read the bill. There are 17,000 new IRS agents that are authorized with the health care bill. There are 17,000 new IRS agents that were authorized through the Ways and Means component of the bill. And I know that Mr. Rangel was the chairman at the time, but good God, gentlemen, you're here as a subject matter experts, and you should understand and answer the questions appropriately. 17,000 new IRS agents are authorized, and as early as last week, the White House, through OMB, indicated they're going to begin that hiring process right now.
Thank you. I'll yield back. And Mr.
I yield
Chairman, I
back.
appreciate that. I told you my question was parochial. I have people who are working on that issue have asked me the questions. I really did not know the specific answer where we're going. I'll quit babbling on. I'll yield back.
Let me say that the gentleman began by referring to himself as a modest state legislator. What was the last position that was held by the gentleman in the Utah State Legislature? I just wanted to know.
I walked out under my own power. They called me speaker at the time, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings.
History teacher during that same period of time. Mr. Chairman, I would like to, with unanimous consent, enter into the record the statement of administration policy.
Without objection, statement of administration.
And I might add, Mr. Chairman, this one does not say, as many have in the past, that staff would recommend to the President that it be vetoed. It ends with, if the President were presented with H.R. 6079, he would veto it.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I would.
I'd just like to say that I hope you'll hand a copy of that to the gentleman sitting to your right so that he can understand the difference between a staff recommendation and a statement, and I think it's very clear that the President would, if handed this bill, repeal it.
Yeah.
He would.
I'll let
he would
Mr.
veto
Polis
it.
take care of himself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 17 months ago, the House took the extraordinary step of adopting a resolution instructing House committees to do some very specific things regarding health care. And since that time, as has been mentioned here several times, we voted 30 times. Tomorrow will be 31 to repeal measures having to do with the Affordable Care Act. I wonder how well the committees have followed those instructions. And I ask any of you, has your committee reported a bill that will increase the number of insured Americans? I gather by no response that you have not. I'm talking the committee now. I'm not talking about you as individuals or what have you.
The gentleman yield for just 1 second. It looks as if Mr. Pallone has to leave, and he wants Kowski to be there. I just wanted to see if anyone has any questions specifically of Mr. Pallone before we allow him to leave, so that Mr. Kowski can take his place.
No.
So no questions in particular from Mr. Pallone. Thank you very much, and Mr. Kowski.
Let me go to
I thank my friend for yielding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go to the next question. Then, has your committee reported a bill that would provide for a permanent dock fix
Mr. Hastings,
that the House instructed you to do?
Mr. Hastings, if I may.
Yes, Dr. Price.
The Ways and Means Committee has held tens of hearings on this legislation and others in an effort to try to garner the kind of information that would allow us to bring forth a piece of legislation. We look forward to doing that. We'd like to do it in a bipartisan fashion.
Then I take it as a no.
Let me just answer that.
Well, excuse me.
I thought you were done.
No, that's. I'll excuse me, gentlemen. Were you finished, Dr. Price?
Apparently the individual doesn't want an answer, so. But I'm
Well,
happy.
I took your answer as a no, as I put it. Mr. Levin?
Look, it can be said that the committee is considering, is studying. The truth of the matter is, no legislation has passed through the Ways and Means Committee that would make any considerable dent in the number of uninsured.
And that would be true also of measures having to do with pre-existing conditions.
There's been no legislation that is
All right, let me
passed
go on,
except the Affordable Care Act.
Let me go in another direction. And as a lawyer and as a former judge, I want to say something to you all that may benefit all of us here. It behooves us as congresspersons to be a great deal more respectful of the 9 members of the United States Supreme Court. And what I saw in the media, and I might add, ideologically, I agree with some of them, and I disagree with some. And I don't have to put my history on the record. I went to the Supreme Court as an individual on 2 occasions, and I thought that they were wrong in their rulings, but I accepted that, and I went about my business. I shudder to think that we would continue to, as one senator said, that 2 members of the Supreme Court changing their position does not make it the law of the land. Well, the senator is wrong. Today, it is the law of the land. We have rights and we have responsibilities that are correlative to those rights. And among our rights is to continue, if we so desire, here in this institution, to seek to repeal, as you are attempting to do in this case, and or to do, as some of us think would be helpful, and that is to continue about the business of following the law as it exists and try to do what we can to make it better. Many of the things that you speak of, the cross-state insurance matters, folk like me would support. I've advocated that there should be collective opportunities for business persons to have associative health matters for all the time I came here, since I came here. And I came here, like Ms. Slaughter pointed out, seeking single payer and a public option. I advocated universal health care before I ever heard Barack Obama's name. And y'all use the president, Obamacare. That doesn't mean anything. It should be Hastings/Obamacare, because I had something to do with it before he did. And the simple fact of the matter is you use it for politics, and that's fine. Tell Dr. Fox when she comes back that most of us read George Orwell's 1984, and some of us read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. But the way we're acting comes more in line with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, if she would want to muddy through those 2 volumes and see the parallels that exist. And among them is the fact that the people began to disrespect themselves. And I personally apologize for those that have disrespected Justice Roberts. I thought, as a lawyer, and I've read about a half of the opinion at this point, read the Cliff Notes, and I can do pretty good with that kind of thing. I thought that he had, in many respects, a stroke of genius, establishing it as the Roberts Court at this point, and he did divide the baby and left all of us. When I was a state court judge and I would handle divorces and the husband and wife would leave the courtroom and both of them would be mad, my bailiff would look at me and say, "You made another good decision." And I think that that's what happened here. And all of this business, you say a tax. A tax on whom, Pete? When you say a tax just on who among the people are you talking about? And I question, and I yield to you to tell me who is being taxed under this.
I appreciate the gentleman asking. The Supreme Court Justice, Mr. Roberts, outlined that he believed that the essence of this was that it was a tax. We could have called it anything we want.
Say the essence. Let me reclaim in my time.
I believe he did.
What he said was that because it could not travel under the Commerce Clause, that in fact it was a tax. Now, you can name it anything you want to. What I name it in the final analysis, and what we all know, is less than 1% of the people in the United States of America will be affected by this penalty tax, whatever you wish to call it. And it's not everybody. And so you run out and you just say the word tax. and that's supposed to then cause everybody to shudder. If it means that I'm taxed another $1,000 so that the people at community centers that get turned away or the people that wind up at emergency hospitals will have them, and let me stick a footnote right there. At emergency facilities are where most of the people wind up, and we wind up having to pay for that. Now, we need to figure out a better way. 14 industrial nations around this world do better than us. Our cost for insurance alone is more. Now, I asked all of you, every one of us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of us are up here right now. Tell me the day your insurance went down in a year. Just anybody, raise your hand. Yeah. Did it go down, Bob, precipitously? You paid $5,000 one year and then you paid none. Are you on the plan now? You were up here 16 years before you came to the Rules Committee. Did you have insurance during that period of time? Medical savings account. Yeah, fine. You had a
medical savings accounts plans have gone down while the other insurance that you're referring to have gone up.
Yeah, I'm talking about.
Thank goodness I had a choice.
Florida Blue and all of Omaha and all of those. Every one of them has gone up. And everybody knows that. Not a single year. They went up before the Affordable Health Care Act, and I got news for you. Whatever we do here, they're going to go up anyhow. Unless we reform entitlement and unless we go to the American public courageously and say that Social Security in its present form is not sustainable, Medicare in its present form. You came up with this particular measure. I think I heard you say, Dr. Price, takes $500 million out of Medicare. Well, the Ryan plan pretty much eliminates Medicare. But who cares? What we need to do is get busy here among ourselves. Sandy had it right. There's enough intelligence in this institution for us to be able to modify this plan going forward. Now, I'm going to say one other thing about Dr. Fox. She keeps going around saying all of these divisive things, and what we are doing to the Supreme Court is divisive and degrading. And just like Jim McGovern said, in the final analysis is hollow. He didn't say it, I'll say it. It's hollow political posturing. And I was thinking last night that if there was a right-wing university, then there are a whole lot of my Republican colleagues and some of my Democratic colleagues that would be eligible to be the dean of the colleges of hypocrisy. We carry on as if there isn't a real world out here, and everybody knows how difficult and complex this issue is. We've seen it in more ways than one. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough doctors. You see all this business about jobs. Let me tell you something about jobs. 660,000 new health care jobs have been created since and before the Affordable Health Care Act came into existence. The third highest profession is healthcare delivery for these young people that don't have a job. But what you aren't saying to them is that there's a new normal. So you say, Rob, you had a health savings account. Hell, there are people that ain't got no savings because they ain't got no job and ain't going to get none anytime soon. At the rate that we're going, somebody needs to tell the American people the truth. Aside from malpractice reform and across state, you don't have a plan. All you want to do is just go out to the November 6th election and say that you repeal something. Well, repeal it then, and I think you will find that when the deal goes down, the American people aren't as crazy as some of us think. But the most important thing that I want you all to do is stop disrespecting the Supreme Court the way that you have, people using hyperbole, people using their skills to go out and scare people and make the court. I would imagine, having been a judge, that Justice Roberts probably has no fear for his life. But the kind of decision that he made rankles so many people in this country until I'm hopeful that the marshals will provide, and I know they know how to, the additional requirements for his safety. Stop it. That's what you do. That's what my little granddaughter says. She says, stop it. And you tell the governor of my state to stop it. He won't implement the health exchange programs as if they aren't going to be health exchange programs anyhow. The federal government would implement it, and that would be about where we come from. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, I can't imagine that we are here with all of the pain in this country, with all of the misery that exists, with all of us knowing the significant number of people. You say, Dr. Fox, there were 10 million people uninsured that wanted insurance. I'm here to tell you there were 42 million when I came here. It must be at least 50. And yes, it includes some people who are too poor to even begin to think about trying to get any insurance. Wake up, people, and start telling people the truth. And get out of this back and forth mumbo jumbo that we go through here going toward an election. I hope a lot of you lose, and I hope I win. Thank you.
We have a series of votes taking place on the House floor, and these panelists have sat here very patiently for a long period of time. It was my hope that we might be able to report out this rule that will allow for lots of debate on the House floor before we began votes. It didn't work out that way. And so having said that, I recognize Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it would be unreasonable to ask me to listen to Mr. Hastings and not have a few comments after that was done. And for you, Mr. Bishop, I'll tell you that U.S. News and World Report reports that 81 new IRS workers will be hired solely to deal with the tanning tax, to make sure that the tanning tax is implemented properly among the rest of the folks. You know, Mr. Pallone started off saying my constituents say we should just move on. I just want to ask. I know Mr. Andrews was here when we passed the HIPAA bill back in '96, which dealt with all of these issues at the federal level, those plans that were federally regulated. Mr. Levin was here at that time. I think you all both voted no as the bill passed the House, but voted yes when it came back. I know Mr. Pallone was here at that time, too. He also voted no. But there was a concerted effort there to deal with these issues in a bipartisan way. Passed 100-0 out of the Senate, only 2 votes against it in the House. The conference report, those were 2 Democrat votes, but it was done in a bipartisan way. And the reason folks can't move on is this was not done in a bipartisan way. This was something that was rammed down the throats of the people. My friend from New York said, I want to make sure I get this right, said people are going to like this bill. People have been looking at this bill for 2 years. And the folks in my district still don't like it. I would ask, Mr. Price represents an area next door to mine. Mr. Pallone says, why don't we just move on? The reason I don't move on is because I have 900,000 constituents that tell me to get rid of this bill. I'm just asking what the experience is in your district.
But mine is similar. People say, look, you've got to do away with this. But it's not just patients. It's employers who say, look, well, we don't know what to do. All we can figure out how to do, get through to this bill is to lay people off, is to not hire. And then as a physician, I can tell you that my physician colleagues, my age, 57, 58, are saying, if this really comes through to all its glory, that's it. That's the final straw. We're out of here. And God help us for the workforce challenges that we're going to have. So the appropriate thing is to proceed and repeal this bill and begin again so we can move forward with patient-centered health care.
Mitt Romney is associated with proposals of this type, though he was associated with it as a governor who implemented it in his home state. And I'm glad it worked for you all. When Kentucky tried something similar, it was a dramatic failure. They went from 43 insurers in the state down to 2. They had to repeal the whole thing and start over. And when you all passed,
They should have followed ours.
I was not here when you all passed this bill. But in Georgia, the folks we think about most often are the Hollander family. Ms. Slaughter said, what are you going to tell to all those kids who have health insurance under this bill and you're going to repeal it and they can't get it? Actually, in Georgia, our experience is the Hollanders, their grandparents, they have 5 kids, 10 grandkids. There was a young woman under her charge. Her parents couldn't take care of her. She was going to become a ward of the state. They became her guardian and ultimately adopted her. And they had the misfortune of adopting her right about the time the President's health care went into action. And when they went to the state insurance commissioner to say, where can I go to get insurance for my child? I heard there's this great new bill that was passed that guarantees pre-existing conditions won't apply. They were told by the insurance commissioner, we actually had insurance companies in the state that would write those policies last year, but because of what Congress passed and the President signed, every single insurance writer of policies for children in the state of Georgia have left the state. Not one child can get insurance in Georgia today in a child-only policy. Those policies are gone. Now, I don't believe for a moment, or one of you who supported that, intended that consequence. I don't believe it for a moment. but the laws of unintended consequences run rampant. You said, Mr. McGovern, that we're all supposed to be here to improve the quality of life of people back home. I kind of think I'm supposed to be here to protect their freedoms. And that the Speaker of their House, we argue about the constitutionality. We argue about the constitutionality of this bill, Mr. McGovern. And every single reform in this bill could have been implemented by the state of Georgia or the state of Utah or the state of Massachusetts, and not one constitutional challenge would have stood. Because the power of states to regulate in this area is plenary. It's the power of the Congress to legislate in this area that becomes a question why it is that folks whose hearts are in the right place, and I know that they are, feel like passing that national solution that ends up preventing the Hollanders' newly adopted 6-year-old from having any access to insurance whatsoever where she would have before the bill passed. What that arrogance of knowing that we have the answer when other folks don't. I'll ask you, Mr. Rowe, is the state legislature back home working at all in this area, or are they completely dependent on us finding that solution?
They haven't started yet because they don't, again, the uncertainty. Let me just tell you, in a 2,700 page bill and 13,000 pages of rules and writing as of today, we could have provided, we had the HHS secretary in front of our committee this year, and I asked her, how many people will you expand coverage to? She said, we think about 30 million. I said, well, I can do that in 2 paragraphs, 80% of it. And that's the 26-year-olds and just expand Medicaid already. And the problem with Medicaid, that's not the great story that's never told, is it doesn't pay for the cost of the care. That cost gets shifted, so we've just expanded a program that hasn't worked. In Tennessee, let me give you the example, Mr. Woodall. 1993 reformed our TennCare, our Medicaid program. We're spending $2.5 billion a year on that program. In 10 years, our Democratic governor had to close it out and cut the rolls because we had tripled the amount of money that was spent on that program. And it almost bankrupted our state. We right now haven't added anything in higher education in 20 years because the money's gone to our TennCare program. In Medicare, well, we talk about estimates and CBOs and all that. Medicare came out in 1965 as a $3 billion program. The government estimators at that time, in 65, there was no CBO, said it would be a $12 billion program in 1990. Real answer, $110 billion. And let me ask a question. Did you vote for Medicare Part D when it came out? 2003. I voted for a good Medicare. Did you vote? Well, okay, now I know the answer to that then. Well, look, I came here to be involved in health care reform. That's why I ran for Congress. And the Republicans weren't even included in this debate. Now you go back.
Mr. Chairman, that's the best place for me to leave it. Dr. Rowe is intimately involved in these issues, and there is not a single person in this room that cares more about the health care of Georgians than Dr. Price and I do.
Let me say to everyone on the panel here that we have other members who have a right to ask you questions, so we have this series of votes on the floor. I'd ask all of you to come back as the other members of the Rules Committee are looking forward. Oh, okay. Well, Mr. Levin was leaving, and so, my gosh, I mean, he has so much to offer. He has so much to offer. I inferred from his standing up that we were about to miss the vote. So, apparently, yeah. Well, I mean, I can understand that. Mr. Polis.
I'll be brief. I just have 2 questions.
Don't worry. Let me just say, if there are 300 people who haven't voted, Mr. McGovern is going to keep his eye on it, and Mr. McGovern is going to guarantee that not one of us will miss the vote. So, Mr. Polis.
Thank you. First question is for Mr. Levin. How much this bill before us? How much would this increase the deficit by? This bill that repeals the Affordable Care Act. How much does it increase the deficit by?
Recent figure. The earlier figure was it would be very substantial. And as Mr. Andrews has said, this committee's proceeding without having that answer.
So do we have a ballpark, or maybe Mr. Andrews, you have a ballpark about how much this would increase the deficit by?
Yeah.
No, we don't, because the Congressional Budget Office is analyzing the effect of 2 changes. The first is the decision by the administration not to enforce the Class Act, and the second is the Supreme Court decision about whether or not states will, in fact, enroll in the Medicaid expansion. So we don't know. In January of 2011, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that repealing the law would cost in excess of $200 billion added to the deficit. I just think, Mr. Polis, that it's incredibly irresponsible to go forward with this vote until the facts are before the House as to what impact it would have on the deficit.
Is it also correct there's no pay-fors in this bill? There's no offsetting cuts
Well, that is
elsewhere?
correct. One thing the majority
tax-
did in January 2011 was to ignore the pay-as-you-go rule. When the Congressional Budget Office came out and said it would add $223 billion to the deficit, I believe it was, ordinarily, you have to offset that with either a spending cut or some new revenue. This committee facilitated, along with the Budget Committee, a magic wand, which everyone waved, and said, well, we're going to pretend that those rules don't apply here. So the first time they did this, of the 30, they just ignored the budget rules. Now what they're going to do is not even go through the pretense of getting a score, which I think is really the wrong way to proceed.
So we paid for health care reform. They don't pay for its repeal, mainly because they know it won't happen.
Yeah, I mean,
They
this
won't
bill,
pay for it anyway.
this bill threatens to increase the burden of debt that our nation faces. Let me move on to my second topic, because I know our time is limited, and then I'll go to you, Dr. Price. Second question for Mr. Andrews is, it's my understanding that under the Affordable Care Act, this affects members of Congress. Members of Congress are to be purchasing our insurance through the exchange, beginning in the year 2014. Is it my understanding that if this Republican bill passes, members of Congress will get the government health care that they have historically gotten, rather than being buying
That's true.
health
If the
care
law
like
stays
the
in
rest of
effect,
Americans?
the only people in America who must join the exchange are the members of Congress. We must be subject to the rules of the exchange. They're the only people. But if this is repealed, then members of Congress, I guess, would stay in the federal employees health benefits plan that we're in right now, for, by the way, which we pay for and pay co-pays and premiums and deductibles. But members of Congress would, in fact, stay in the FEHB instead of having to buy through the exchange. One of the things that's been misstated about this bill is it does not apply to members of Congress. It most emphatically does. If the law stays in effect, then members here and our families will be insured through the exchange.
So this repeal bill before us would prevent members of Congress from buying insurance like other American families, and instead give them a government health care, which
That
some
is
of us
basically right, that members of Congress would have their health insurance paid for through the federal employees health benefits plans and pay premiums, co-pays, and deductibles as any other federal employee does.
Yeah, it's not exactly what my constituents were urging me to do when I was back home last week, was to give Congress their own gold-plated health care plan. I'll go to Representative Price.
Thanks. I just wanted to briefly comment about the budgetary issue. The reason that the budgetary language, statutory pay-go language is in the bill, that allows us to have the bill scored through CBO and not through OMB. It's the standard language that is used for these kinds of pieces of legislation.
Quick follow-up on that. Once it's scored, is there a plan to pay for this bill through either offsetting cuts elsewhere or tax increases?
I don't believe you're going to have to do that, but the provision in Section D, I think it is, or Section 4 of the bill, provides for the ability to have that discussion with CBO and make it so that this is revenue neutral.
Mr. Andrews.
I understand why we're having that discussion after you pass the repeal. I thought the way we're supposed to do things is you find out how much something's going to cost, and then you take a vote on it, and people vote yes or no. I think it's extraordinary, maybe unprecedented in recent decades, that the Congress is about to make an incredibly important decision, and I think the majority would admit they have no idea whether this repeal adds or subtracts to the deficit. The last authoritative ruling on this from the Congressional Budget Office was repealing the law adds in excess of $200 billion to the deficit. When this goes to floor tomorrow, I guess the answer is we're just going to guess and talk about it later on. I really fail to understand the wisdom of that.
I yield back.
Mr. Nugent, Mr. Scott, Mr. Webster. Okay. Thanks to all of you for being here. We greatly appreciate your testimony. We were planning to go to Ms. Schwartz next. We do have 3 votes on the floor, and so there are no members who have voted. You were here filling in for, I assume, for questions. The next panel is the Budget Committee, and then the members who are not members of any other committee. But the committee stands in recess. What we'll do is any members you wish to testify. Okay. Any members who wish to testify, please come back. We'll begin at the beginning of the last vote on the floor. We'll begin at the beginning of the last vote if members come back up. Committee stands in recess. Well, I'm just saying, every The Rules Committee will reconvene, and the minority has agreed to let us proceed without a quorum. And let's go first, if it's all right, let's go first to Ms. Schwartz. And without objection, any prepared statement you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I do have a few comments to make, and wanted to make them on behalf of the Budget Committee. They've asked me to present on their behalf, so I'll do that if I may. And then, of course, if there are questions, I'll take them. There was a long conversation before this, but I did want to offer these comments. 2 weeks ago, as you know, the United States Supreme Court issued a decision upholding the Affordable Care Act. In upholding the act, the court affirmed a path forward for seniors to afford life-saving medications, for children with pre-existing conditions to receive care, about 17 million such children, and for 30 million more Americans to be able to afford coverage. Because of the Affordable Care Act, families won't go broke because of an illness. Small businesses can afford affordable coverage for their employees, and young adults can remain on their parents' coverage. And there are about 3 million young adults on their parents' coverage.
Let's make this a panel. Mr. Garamendi has already been presumptuous.
That would be great.
At the table, and Mr. Welch will let you come to the table as well, and
that would be helpful.
any other members, and we're hearing from Ms. Schwartz now. So
Thank you.
And I'll say to all of the witnesses, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome a summary.
So let me just say that despite the Supreme Court decision, the House Republicans are continuing their politically motivated attempts to repeal health care reform, instead of responding to the priorities of the American public, to work across the aisle, to grow our economy and strengthen opportunities and financial security for America's middle class. The legislation before the Rules Committee today reflects a clear decision by the Republican leadership to put partisanship ahead of the pressing needs of our constituents and our country. In fact, we have voted 30 times to repeal all or part of the Affordable Care Act. Today, if the Rules Committee goes forward, would be offer the 31st time the Republicans have called for a vote to deny Americans access to affordable quality health care coverage. Let's be clear, the Republicans' efforts will not be successful. But it is also clear that what their efforts today would suggest, when to get their way, it would increase the deficit. There was some discussion about this previously, but last year the CBO estimated the cost of repeal at $210 billion over 10 years, unpaid for, as pointed out in the previous panel. It put insurance companies back in charge of Americans' health care coverage, offering fewer consumer protections and fewer options, particularly for individuals and for small businesses. It increased costs and cuts benefits for seniors on Medicare, and eliminates tax credits to help insurance be more affordable for small businesses. And the Republicans' actions take time and attention away from the work we should be doing. Republicans in Congress are choosing to play politics rather than working to find bipartisan solutions to the important challenges we face as families, as communities, and as a nation.
Thank you very much.
I can submit the rest of my comments for the record, but I do want to say that the actions today in the suggestion of repealing the Affordable Care Act actually creates instability and uncertainty for American businesses and the American middle class, and hurts our economic growth going forward. And it is not something that most of us, I believe, in Congress, and certainly not most Americans want us to be doing.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schwartz. Are there any questions for Ms. Schwartz? She has to leave for another meeting. No questions. Thank you very much for being here. Let's go to Ms. Schakowsky, and then we'll go to Mr. Welch and Mr. Garamendi. And again, looks like you have beautifully prepared statements.
I know. I will.
Let me just say that without objection, any statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we would welcome a brief summary.
Okay. I just want to once again briefly restate some of the numbers. 105 million Americans who no longer have lifetime limits on their health coverage because of Obamacare. 86 million Americans who received at least one free preventive service, 17.5 million children with pre-existing conditions who can no longer be denied health insurance coverage, 3.1 million young adults on their parents' policies as a result of Obamacare. In the last panel, a statement was made about businesses. My son is a small businessman, and at his birthday party, he's an adult, he was saying, "Thanks, Mom, because my accountant tells me that my health and I get a tax break because of Obamacare on the insurance that I provide for my employees." So to say that businesses are paying more, small businesses are really benefiting. I do want to just say one thing about this constituent, Lizzie, whose daughter Olivia suffered a stroke at birth 11 years ago. So from her first breath, she had a pre-existing condition. Now she has right side paralysis, epilepsy, cognitive delays. Before Obamacare, Lizzie and her husband had to navigate an almost unnavigable system in order to get coverage for Olivia. Every time they switched employers, they were in trouble. But thank goodness, because of Obamacare, they don't have to worry anymore. What a burden is lifted. And that's what I implore my colleagues to think about, that in every country that has health care for all their employees, for all their citizens, people get cancer. They have diabetes. They have high blood pressure. But not one of those people is carrying around the burden of thinking, how am I going to pay for it? Am I going to have to go bankrupt? And finally, in the United States of America, we have a bill that brings us to that point. All those benefits that are there now, please don't repeal them.
Thank you.
That's my testimony, and I'll submit this to the record.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schakowsky. Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to be back here. The beauty of this and gentleness of this art belies the veracity of this debate. Here's my concern. My view, Congress is making a spectacle of itself. I mean, there's a reason that we have 9 or 10% popularity, and it's because we're dysfunctional. And I get it that there are many members of this body, the majority, that disapprove of what is being now called Obamacare. That many members hate it. They think it's a threat to the economy. They think it's a threat to liberty. And obviously, that represents a point of view of the people that you represent. But how many times can we repeal the same law? We're moving on to number 32. That does not say to the American people, even ones that agree with those who want to repeal it, that that's a serious policy. That says it's serious politics. 32 times. When does it end? The second thing is repealing health care is not the same as having a health care policy. And the question that I think is a fair question for those of us who support this bill to ask those who want to repeal the bill is, where's your plan A? Where is it? Now, there's been some references to it, but instead of putting it on the floor, making a serious effort to pass even components of what others say need to be done in order to substitute for the health care bill that is the law of the land, it's not put out there. Instead of offering an alternative, there's an offer of yet another repeal, 31 or 32, but who's counting? And the fair question I think the American people should have of the proponents of repeal is, where's your plan A on keeping our kids on a policy till age 26? Where is your plan A when it comes to yes or no on covering folks with a pre-existing condition? Where's the plan A on guaranteeing that seniors are going to have access to free preventive care? Where's your plan A to start closing that donut hole that creates real hardship for folks when they can't pay for their prescription drugs? So what we're doing here is business as usual in Congress. It's an argument that is without end. It's a repeal that is on a road to nowhere. I'm not disputing the right of any member to have a heartfelt and determined position, one way or the other on this, including repeal, but it's been done. So at this point, it's not a serious, in my view, it's not a serious proposal. It's simply a political talking point. And you know what? That's a fair and legitimate debate for us, and let the American people decide on each of us in our respective races where they want to come out. Let them decide. But let's not pretend that this is a serious action that's going to make a difference and have an outcome that will make a difference to American business, to American jobs.
Thank you very much. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I do have a prepared statement, and I'll submit that. I listened to part of the debate before our votes, and a couple of things come to mind. One, I spent 8 years as the insurance commissioner elected of the biggest state in this nation, and I'd be happy to discuss with you the insurance issues that were raised earlier. They are profoundly important, and I believe that to assume the insurance companies will do what is right is wrong. They will do what is in their best interest, that is to increase their profit. A lot of discussion about freedom and liberty. I want to give personal examples of freedom or the lack thereof, and liberty or the lack thereof. From the day she was conceived until she was 21, our daughter was covered by insurance. The day after her birthday, she lost her insurance, and she had no freedom to get health care until this became the law of the land. She's now insured once again under our policy. Another example is my sister-in-law, juvenile diabetic. She suffered with that illness until the day she died. On her divorce, she lost her insurance. And for about 25 years, she struggled to deal with her disease and to provide what she could afford. With her family's help and others, she was able to get some level of assistance. She couldn't get a job except as a salesperson on her own commission because she had a pre-existing condition. She did not have liberty and she did not have freedom. She did not have freedom to take a job that she wanted. She did not have the liberty. And ultimately, her health care was compromised by the fact that she did not have insurance. I'll give you one more example. My chief of staff. His son was born with kidney failure some 20 years ago. He had an insurance policy until the moment they discovered the renal failure at about 2 days of age, 2 days old. He and his family lost their insurance. That family did not have the freedom to take a job, to move. So when we toss around words like freedom and liberty, we ought to look at what they mean to individuals. Individuals that do not have health care, or individuals that keep the job that they have because they have to have the health care, do not have the freedom to take another job, to travel. And individuals do not have the freedom to carry out their lives unless they have health care. This legislation is not perfect, but it does provide millions upon millions of Americans with the opportunity to enjoy freedom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ridley. Any questions for Ms. Schakowsky or Mr. Welch or Mr. Garamendi? Mr. McGovern.
No, I just want to make one observation. One of the things that I've learned is that after having maybe billions of dollars now spent against the Health Care Act, which was called Obamacare, what I've learned is that most people, there's no relationship between what they think is Obamacare and what is the Affordable Care Act. This kind of myth that's been built up about Obamacare, with billions and billions of dollars spent to just distort everything. I know people and I know elected officials whose kids are able to stay on their health insurance because they're young adults but don't yet quite have jobs, and who have taken advantage of that benefit as part of the Affordable Care Act, who come out publicly and say they're against Obamacare. There's this disconnect out there. And, you know, and again, which brings me back to kind of the point I made earlier as to why we're here. We have no CBO score. So when, you know, I'm waiting, where are all the people that care about the deficit and the debt? I mean, usually they want a CBO score before we proceed so we know what the impact on our deficit is going to be. There's no alternatives. You know, we know this is going nowhere. And it all goes back to this Politico story, which I read today, which is GOP pre-recess plan, push hot button votes. Again, I would just say, you want to do that, fine. But let's spend more time trying to, you know, on issues like jobs, to put people back to work, trying to find common ground on some of these issues that will actually mean something in people's lives. This is all political theater. This is, no matter what the vote is tomorrow, we all know what it's going to be. This is not going to mean anything in the short term. We have an election to deal with that. And if the Republicans want to go out and campaign against these patient protections, go at it. And we'll see how it all comes out. But for the time being, we're wasting time. We got a lot of people who are hurting in this country, and you know, this Congress is fiddling while Rome is burning. And I think that's an unfortunate circumstance we find ourselves in. But I thank you very much for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Garamendi, I know you've had a lot of experience in this area, twice elected insurance commissioner, 16 years in the State House, a lieutenant governor, Senate Majority Leader. I can think of lots of persuasive cases to make for every line of the President's bill and lots of cases to make against it. What of those reforms, thinking about those family members, those personal experiences you have had, what of those reforms have to happen in Washington because of the nature of the industry and could not have happened in the California legislature or through the actions of the insurance commissioner or the governor?
All of them. All of them, because the current insurance system or the previous insurance system was state by state. And if you're interested in freedom, that is the freedom to travel, to move, to take a job somewhere else besides where you happen to be located, you need to have uniformity across the nation on those issues that I spoke to here earlier. With regard to other kinds of insurance matters, some of them could be dealt with. But the reality is that you have a national system. And if the states are left to compete amongst themselves, either advantage or disadvantage, depending upon which ways the laws go, it doesn't work. There's talk about sale of insurance across state lines. I think you said that earlier today. In fact, insurance is sold across state lines when there is uniformity in the policy and in the strength of the insurance company itself. So that issue turns out to be one in which you have a race to the bottom. That is, under the previous system, insurance sold across state lines was usually, and we found this repeatedly in California, where companies would come in, sell a policy without authorization to people, and then they were never intending or they could not pay the bill when some incident occurred. We were constantly chasing after those companies. So you need uniformity in the policy as well as in the viability of the company selling the policy, multi-state. The specific examples that I gave some of them could be dealt within a state. And in fact, California will set up an exchange with or without the federal law. Some states will not. But an exchange becomes an extremely important part of dealing with the problems that the three examples that I gave, in that the exchange allows for a large pool to be created, a pool of different risks. In that process, you're able to spread the risk and you're able to obtain a reasonably priced policy. So the answer is no and yes, depending upon which specific thing you're talking about. But in total, you need this nation needs to have a national policy on how we're going to deal with health care. Failure to do that will create ambiguity, chaos, and millions of people not having insurance and the freedom that goes with having insurance.
And there's something unique about health insurance as distinguished, that same blanket policy for homeowners insurance, auto insurance, schools for our kids, housing codes to protect our children. You, as insurance commissioner, you've seen something unique about the insurance industry that requires that national solution in ways that so many other health and safety issues might not.
Well, the answer is yes, there is something very unique about health insurance. It is health, an individual's health is fundamental to their personal liberty and welfare. Now, the uniqueness has already been taken up and has actually been in place for some 40-some years now. It's called Medicare. If you happen to be 65, and I think there's more than a couple of us in this room that are, we are automatically enrolled in Medicare, and it's universally available to everyone who is 65 and older. And it happens to be extraordinarily efficient and effective.
Well, I know in large part that's true. You do the same kind of casework I do. I'm sure you work cases for folks regularly who actually are over 65 and don't qualify for Medicare because they've never paid into the system. They had to earn their way into Medicare. And if they've never paid in, if they've recently immigrated from overseas, they do not qualify for Medicare as a result. But I think that
they should.
And I think that's the point. I mean, we heard Mr. Hastings say it. We heard Ms. Slaughter say it, that what folks wanted was a nationalized health care system to deal with exactly those uniformity issues that you've brought forward. But this was just the best that folks could do in that political environment. I appreciate that candor. I have great respect for what you all do in California, and I enjoy watching what goes on. Sometimes it goes well. Sometimes it goes
always a good show.
Not so well. It is always a good show, and we learn from that experience, and we adopt some of those things, and we reject some of those ideas.
In understanding the healthcare system, you need to keep in mind that there are two fundamental parts to it. They are exceedingly important to understand this. One is the financing of the system, which in the United States is made up of government financing, which is actually the bulk of it. That's both state and local. And the other is the delivery system. That is the doctor, the hospital. We get these two things confused when we talk about health care, and in doing so, we get bad policies coming out of it. What you want to do is to have a financing system that is efficient and effective with the lowest possible administrative cost in collecting the money and paying the bills. On the delivery side, and this is much discussed by all of us, we want to be able to choose who is going to deliver our medical services. And in the United States, we have a plethora of opportunities. We got the doc in the box. We've got the emergency room. We have the big university hospitals, some private, some public. We have socialized delivery care. Call it Veterans Administration. The University of California, some of the best hospitals in the nation are in fact socialized. University of California, LA, San Francisco, so forth. So we have this wide range of choices, and you want to have a financing system that allows the individual to choose. And in that choice, you want to have a selection of policies. You know, let's call it platinum down to basic, fine. And we ought to be willing in this nation, it seems to me, to have all Americans with a basic policy. And if you want to go buy a platinum policy, God bless you, go buy it on your own, over and above the basic. That makes a system that we're moving towards with this legislation. It's not there, but it moves in that direction.
That sounds surprisingly like some of the descriptions that I have heard some of your colleagues give of the budget proposal for Medicare and the exchange that would be available for folks of my age when we get to the Medicare plan. I agree with you. It's nice to have that floor and have that flexibility above and beyond that. Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for being here. That will conclude the hearing.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's okay.
We're gonna
Wanting I could just respond a minute to Mr. Woodall.
Sure.
Before everybody leaves. It doesn't matter. You want
Please,
to go, it's quite all right. The only thing I wanted to say is, we're mentioning the fact that most of us like single payer. And I need to respond, and certainly need to have it put on the record, that the administrative cost of Medicare is about 2 to 3%. And the administrative cost of private health care, which is what this Obama business is, because it will be run by private insurance agencies, is between 28 and 30%. That's an enormous cost right there that we're going to see change if we ever find ourselves. Yes.
If I could, though, because of Obamacare, there's the medical loss ratio, and insurance companies have to spend at least 80%, or in some cases 85% of premium dollars on health care, and as a consequence, billions of dollars are going to be sent to consumers this summer in August in rebates because they have exceeded that. If I could also just respond. We do have a number of national structures like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration that sets rules for businesses all across the country. So, of course, we have lots of regulations and health care and safety regulations that apply. States could potentially have done it themselves, but in fact, we say that this is a national priority. And finally, in the United States of America, saying that health care, for most Americans anyway, will be a right, is established under this legislation. And then there will be many differences among the states because they can set up their own exchanges and get waivers, et cetera, that will be suitable for that particular state under a national rubric.
I think we're really late in the day coming up with this in this country. We put too much burden, as far as I'm concerned, on businesses to have to carry this cost when other countries don't have to do that. Countries that we do business with, countries we trade with, their corporations don't have to worry about the problem of health care as we do. It would be extremely bright of us, I think, for a change to allow something like this to go forward. It would make us sort of bring us up to date, so to speak. Thank you. Mr.
Again,
Chair.
thank you all very much. That will conclude the hearing, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 6079, the repeal of Obamacare Act, a closed rule. The rule provides 5 hours of debate with 30 minutes equally divided and controlled by the majority leader and minority leader or their respective designees, 60 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and Workforce, 60 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Education, on Energy and Commerce, 60 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Ways and Means, 30 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on the Budget, 30 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary, and 30 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Small Business. Rule waives all points for or against consideration. The bill provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points for or against provisions in the bill. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
You've heard the motion, gentlemen. Any discussion or amendment? Ms. Slaughter?
Yes, I do. First, I want to say that I think this is an awful lot of time to give to a matter that the Senate has already turned down, so we know it's not going anywhere. And it just points out once again that what we're doing here is killing time, and I do have an amendment to it, though, while we're at it, see if I can get this done. For a long time, I've been concerned about the McCarran-Ferguson Act, which exempted health insurance from any federal oversight at all. It's all done state by state. So that's caused a lot of trouble, and as I think Mr. Garamendi referred to that. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give necessary waivers for amendment by Mr. DeFazio, number 1, which would repeal the health insurance industry's antitrust exemption.
Vote occurs in the Slaughter amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair. The noes have it. The noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
And Mr. Clerk, the total?
4 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. This is if the clerk has a humidor there. I wondered exactly. I've never seen that box before. I just wondered if got it out of my office. I'm not sure. Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm a little surprised, given some of the comments that were made at the beginning of this hearing about kind of this open and transparent process, that we have a closed rule. And as my colleagues know, a closed rule means that no member of the House, not just Democrat but Republican, has the right to even offer an amendment to this in any way, shape, or form. So I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 6079 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor. I would just say, Mr. Chairman, this is the 31st time that the House is going to consider repealing or defunding the Affordable Care Act. Even after the Supreme Court ruled that it's constitutional, we're here playing this blatantly partisan game and I think wasting the American taxpayers' time and money. We ought to be talking about jobs and ways to protect the middle class, not ways to put power back in the hands of insurance companies. And if we have to consider this a 31st time, then we need to make this bill an open rule so that everybody can be heard.
The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the
Mr.
noes.
Roll call.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
And Mr. Clerk, the total?
4 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Mr. Polis.
Mr. Chair, I want to be recognized to speak on the underlying rule proposal.
So no further amendments then?
No.
Then surely, the gentleman's recognized as
Thank
set
you.
for discussion or amendment.
I ask unanimous consent to submit a statement by Mr. Dingell to the record.
Without objection, Mr. Dingell's statement will appear in the record,
I ask unanimous consent to submit a statement by Mr. Conyers to the record.
and Mr. Conyers' statement will appear in the record.
And I ask unanimous consent to submit an article from the Hill to the record.
Article from the Hill will appear in the record without objection.
And just to quote in part from that, repealing President Obama's health care law would let members of Congress keep their government-subsidized insurance coverage after they retire, end quote. And, of course, the rest of the article will be available for members to peruse in the record.
We'll look forward to that.
I will yield back.
Thank you very much. The vote occurs. Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've not read that Hill article. Is the suggestion that the vote tomorrow is somehow a self-serving vote for members of Congress and their health care benefits as opposed to all of the other things we've talked about today?
Well, as a matter of fact, I mean, certainly that piece could have been carved out by the Republican majority. So clearly the Republican majority did intend to make sure that members of Congress who retire get their benefits. I don't know if they are predicting perhaps a large number of retirements from their side at the polls or not, but for whatever reason, that is in the bill.
Vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Being the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mr.
Roll call,
Sessions will
please.
be, excuse me.
Yes,
Clerk
sir.
will call the roll.
Mr. Sessions.
Aye.
Mr. Sessions, aye. Ms. Fox.
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent.
Aye.
Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings.
No.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis.
No.
Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman, aye.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
8 yeas, 4 nays.
And the motion is agreed to, and Mr. Sessions will be handling this for the majority,
And I'll handle for them.
and Ms. Slaughter for the minority. We will be meeting tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock on the resources bill, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.